maybe can you tell us a little bit about how the gut influences the brain and how the brain influences the gut?
Yeah, this is a question that is in the minds of many people. There is a huge interest now in what people call the gut-brain axis, which is basically the collection of biological signals that originate in the gut and affect brain function in some way. There are a number of possibilities to explain how the gut influences the brain. One is by the release of chemicals, hormones that from the gut get into the circulation and may change the brain directly. But maybe the most important pathways are nervous, are related to neurons that connect the gut to the brain. So there are two main, let us say, avenues by which the gut communicates with the brain via neurons. One is the vagus nerve, which is a cranial nerve, the largest of the cranial nerves in the body, that transmits information continuously from the gut to the brain. And also there are sensory neurons of the spinal cord that are also monitor the gut and continuously send information to the brain about the state of the gut. What we know is that the brain pays a lot of attention to what is happening in the gut, and the gut can modulate a number of sensations and perceptions in the brain. One of them being the sensation of reward. So when nutrients are detected in the gut, the vagus nerve transmits that information to the reward centers of the brain in such a way that nutritive caloric foods produce a very strong reward response, even independently of how good the taste of the aroma were. And on the other hand, we have the influence of the brain on the gut. The brain controls a number of processes in the gut via the autonomic system, and the parasympathetic arm of the autonomic system is a major regulator of gut function. It promotes digestion, it promotes the release of substances from the pancreas and the gallbladder that accelerate and facilitate digestion. So changes in the brain via the autonomic system are expected to produce changes in the gut via nervous pathways. And that's why we see so much correlation between psychological states and gut health, as we all know about the interconnections between these two things.
So with mental health, it's also omnidirectional, that like mental state affects the gut, but also the gut affects like mental state?
Yes, this is possible. We are still trying to understand how exactly the gut and the brain interact. There are a number of novel tools in neuroscience that are now being used for that. But we know for sure that changes in the brain, for example, the perception of stress or states of chronic stress, and cause a change in the gut, including the microbiome. But also it is possible that because the gut changed, the microbiome changed, the chemical physiological composition of the gut is altered in an extent that this will impact on how the brain perceives the state of the gut. So it is likely that the communication is bidirectional due to this, due to the intrinsic pathways that connect the two organs.
Okay, yeah. So earlier you also said like stress has a big impact on the microbiome. Can you maybe explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so stress has been known to be correlated with changes in the microbiome. So when you induce states of stress in a number of models in animals and people, for example, in animals, maternal separation or restrained stress, and when you study humans, for example, children who have been bullied in school, you observe a change in the composition of the microbiome, especially a suppression in the levels of a particular family of microbes known as lactobacilli. We know these microbes are important for gut health. They play a number of protective functions in the gut. And so we know that stress leads to that state of suppressed lactobacilli. The way it works is a little mysterious. We have recently discovered that a group of mucosal glands in the gut called the glands of Brunner, after the name of the person who discovered them centuries ago, we discovered that the secretions from these glands are very important for maintaining the normal levels of microbiome. And because these glands are stimulated by the vagus nerve, in stress, the vagus nerve activity is suppressed, and these glands do not operate or secrete normally. So that is one of the mechanisms by which the brain, by changing the activity of the vagus nerve, causes changes in the microbiome, because the end result is a change in the types of secretion that the gut produces. And this suppression of a lactobacilli in the gut eventually result in changes in systemic immunity, because lactobacilli are important regulators of the immune system. So you have an impact or a weakened immunity in the long term that probably start with changes in the microbiome.
So stress can reduce the immune function?
Yes. Yes, stress, yes, by many different steps. Chronic stress, especially the type of stress that we humans are exposed very often at work or family issues, they weaken immunity. The body becomes more susceptible to infections, to opportunistic infections. Pathogens get in the circulation in a facilitated way. And so the question has been, how is it possible that psychological states allow for this weakening of the immune system? And the hypothesis that we think could explain this effect is that stress first impacts on the microbiome, and eventually the changes in the microbiome open the way for a weakening of the immune system, because the protection that the gut provides to the body has been damaged by the change in the types of microbes that live in the gut.
Is there also a special process when the autoimmune system is going out of order?
Yeah, this is another good question. We don't quite understand yet the relationship between microbiome and autoimmune disease. We know there is a connection. There is, for example, a lot of interest in the potential role of the microbiome in food allergy. So why certain individuals react to food that is actually beneficial to them in an immunological way. So the body is trying to attack these proteins that have been ingested. So it is very possible, based on empirical data from patients and animal models, that the types of microbes that live in the gut have a huge influence on the way gut cells and immune cells that live in the gut react to food. Right? But we don't quite understand yet the mechanism. And there is even some preliminary evidence that maybe the glands I was talking about that secrete substances important for microbes, that they are altered in individuals with a food allergy, with a clinically diagnosed food allergy. So definitely there must be some very strong connection there. We know that changing the microbiome is going to change immune cell production generally. There are changes in the bone marrow, there are changes in the spleen and other immune organs. So it's very likely that these things connect. But I don't think there is a model that is fully established yet to explain this connection.
I have heard that Helicobacter pylori plays a little role in this stabilization of the autoimmune system.
Yeah, this is another very interesting topic, because paradoxically it seems that H. pylori's presence in the gut is anticorrelated with certain immunological and autoimmune diseases. For example, it does seem that having H. pylori's in the gut is protective against inflammatory bowel disease, for example. So these two classes of patients, they do not overlap much. There are epidemiological studies showing that you may have one or the other, but not so much a simultaneous diagnosis of H. pylori's in an inflammatory bowel disease. So it could be that because bacteria, they somehow compete for the gut environment, right? And they are not necessarily compatible, that H. pylori's is not compatible with the microbiome composition that facilitates inflammatory bowel disease or some other mechanism. But it's true that at least at the epidemiological level, there is evidence that certain diseases do not occur in the presence of H. pylori's, even if we know that this class of bacteria produce ulcerations and other damages to the gut epithelium, right?
So would you say it's a good thing to have H. pylori's, or
no? It means, yeah, we not necessarily, because you can also be more vulnerable to ulcerations, right? Which can also occur in the presence of chronic stress. But so not necessarily, but the interesting thing is that this lack of overlap may provide us with some information about what the mechanism is for these two diseases, right? Which remain mysterious, yeah.
Still, the mechanism to become IBD also isn't...
It's not fully explained. I mean, some people would say that inflammatory bowel disease is a neurological disease in some way, because the involvement of the nervous system seems to be very important. And there is also strong evidence that the microbiome or microbiome changes are at least permissive to the emergence of the disease, right? So there are very well documented changes in microbiome composition in the gut of these patients, including some changes that are, let us say, that go in the same direction as the changes we see in stress. For example, a suppression in the levels of lactobacilli. So there may be some commonalities there in terms of the gut barrier being becoming vulnerable due to changes in the microbiome. Yeah, but the complete picture is not clear yet, and that's probably why we don't have still a fully effective treatment for inflammatory bowel disease, and we don't quite understand yet the differences between Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, right, that are part of the inflammatory disease class, but hopefully we will get there. Yeah.
Do you also know something about the how the gut-brain axis affects?
Yeah, irritable bowel disease is a more, it's a more, let us say, it's a different type of symptoms, right? That you don't necessarily have these open ulcerations that you see in inflammatory bowel disease. There is clearly a psychological component to it, in the sense, as it does for inflammatory bowel disease, in the sense that internal states like stress or depression may facilitate at least the perception of the symptoms. But again, nothing that someone would say there is a fully mechanistic explanation, and we just need to develop the treatment accordingly. People are still trying to understand the mechanisms. Yeah, it could. That's one possibility, right? That as you change the microbiome, you change the types of signals, especially immune signals that occur in the gut, and you lead the gut to react to these changes, right? So we know, for example, that the other branch of the autonomic system, the sympathetic system, knows that the microbiome has changed. The sympathetic neurons in the gut, they are overactivated when there is no microbiome, like for example in germ-free animals, or whether the composition of the microbiome changed importantly. So these neurons react, and they are capable of not only causing some immune distress in the gut itself, but they will also affect other organs like the spleen and change the immune system as a whole. So that's one potential mechanism for why these diseases that have symptoms all over the body, produce symptoms all over the body, are related to the microbiome, because neurons in the gut, they detect changes in the microbiome and they start sending signals to different organs.
Can you maybe tell us a little bit about your research? What are you doing research on?
Yeah, so in this case, I mean, in the realm of microbiome, if you mean, so we are very interested in, in this relationship between psychological distress and the changes in the microbiome connected to changes in the immune system. So we were very interested in the role of the vagus nerve and the ability of the vagus nerve to control these glands of Brunner that are important for the microbiome composition. So we think that this is one mechanism that connects the brain to the gut in a very specific pathway that can explain the changes in the microbiome due to stress. But our long-term aim is to try to understand better why gut diseases emerge in the context of changes in the brain, of stress, depression. So we are trying to not only understand why the microbiome changes, but why the diseases that are linked to the microbiome emerge in patients that are going through psychological distress. So we want to expand our research to a better understanding of inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel disease, and others. Yeah.
How did you do your studies? Do you work with animals, or how?
We work
What?
with with animals and humans. So we have there are interesting animal models of changes in the microbiome that due to either genetic mutations or certain treatments they carry different types of microbes in their gut or no microbes at all, which is also very helpful to understand the relationship between microbes and the immune system. You can see not having microbes totally changes your immunological, physiological parameters. But in humans also, you can have either individuals with similar changes in their microbiome, and we can analyze their brain states, how their brains are responding to certain stimuli. But also there are patients under certain types of treatments like microbiome interventions or microbiome transplants that we can also analyze their physiology and their brains, right? We are very interested in looking at the effects of certain treatments for depression on the microbiome and on immunity. So especially the stimulation of the vagus nerve in major depression. It's one of the approved treatments for medication-resistant depression, and we are very interested in learning whether changes in the microbiome and immunity underlie the positive effects that these treatments have in a subgroup of the patients. And by understanding this, we hope that the treatment can be improved and become more effective to more patients. Yeah.
How can you stimulate the vagus nerve? Through medication, or?
The usual way is you implant a kind of a wire. It's called a cuff electrode. You wrap it around the nerve, and there is a little battery that the person carries on their chest, and then you send pulses to the nerve, and the nerve is activated under different types of regimens. There are new, less invasive techniques that are still that need some investigation in terms of how much they replicate the effects, but it's usually through a direct stimulation of the nerve using electric pulses.
Okay, and that's already an accepted therapy option?
Yes. So what happened was people knew for many years that this treatment can help people with epilepsy, and it decreases the number of seizures. And eventually it was noticed that the mood scores of some of those patients improved also very clearly, and then clinical trials were run, and maybe around 10 years ago the FDA approved it as a therapy for patients who do not respond well to medication. And it's a relatively simple procedure, and it's a treatment that my understanding is that here in Europe, including Germany, there is a good number of patients undergoing this treatment. Okay. Yeah, because it was discovered a little bit like empirically, then the mechanisms are not fully understood, right? But there is this increasing, let us say, suspicion that the reasons might be related to changes in immunity or even possibly the microbiome. Because we know from other research that stimulating the vagus nerve also produces anti-inflammatory effects, and it seems to be important for reacting against infections. So on one hand, the vagus nerve is involved in connecting the gut and the brain, is involved in regulating mood and psychological state, and also the immune system. So we think this nerve is the key connecting psychology, gut health, and immunity, because it's somehow involved in all these areas in different contexts. So we are trying to put together an understanding of why the nerve seems to be related to all these factors at the same time that are otherwise also related to each other.
What medical, like what therapy options would be possible?
Yeah, we are trying to understand, I mean, the physiological conditions that maintain a normal microbiome. So if we understand what are the roles for the vagus nerve, for secretions from glands, and other and the sympathetic system, if we understand them together, we may be able to formulate a strategy in which there is a sustained positive change in immunity that would derive from improving gut conditions. So if we normalize vagal activity, secretory activity in the gut, and supplementing maybe people with probiotics, we may be able to maintain a more chronic state of health protection that eventually will lead to an improved overall immune state that not only protects against infections but also seem to be important for mental health in general.
Are there already like things in lifestyle that can affect this positively?
Yeah, it does seem that this is another field where things are very is still up in the air. There is not much certainty in the fields of nutrition and dieting about what exactly people should do, but certainly avoiding certain types of hyper-processed foods, right? And trying to maintain a not only a healthy diet but a healthy routine. They all seem to be correlated with a greater immune function and gut protection, barrier protection. Yeah, there are studies over the years, even from like about 100 years ago, proposing that the consumption of probiotic-rich foods like yogurts and others are beneficial in the long run, right? But because it's very hard to control for other factors, lifestyle, exercise, so I don't think anybody can say they have the silver bullet for health, but we slowly get a better and better understanding of the conditions. Yeah.
Do you know, are there special teams of bacteria who are working in the gut together?
Yeah, there are groups of bacteria that clearly interact, whereas some others are not compatible. The so-called probiotic, right, include two important classes of bacteria, the bifidobacteria and lactobacilli, that seem to be correlated with more healthy states of the gut mucosa. And on the other hand, in situations where the immune system is weakened, including in inflammatory diseases, then you see a suppression in the levels of these types of bacteria. So they seem, maybe they work together, they co-release factors that together are important for intestinal cells, maybe not, but they seem to be, let us say, convergent or complementary, whereas there are other types of bacteria, certain pathogens, some dangerous bacteria that seem to find their way into the body in a much easier way when these bacteria are not present. So somehow, either because they can form a physical kind of barrier in the gut so that these bacteria, these potential pathogens cannot penetrate into the blood, or because the resident bacteria are able to fight or to take resources from these pathogens. It's not clear, but certainly pathogens take advantage of the absence of some important classes of bacteria to infect the body. So, for example, in animals that are stressed, or in animals that lack the glands that I was mentioning before, if you inoculate some small amounts of pathogens in the gut of animals in this condition, you see a very high penetrance of these pathogens into the circulation. So the gut is less protected, much less protected, when these types of bacteria, these probiotics, are not present. And if you restore the levels of this bacteria in the gut, then the animals are much better protected against pathogens. So clearly there is a complex relationship between the different species. Some of them converge and complement each other in their functions, and some others are clearly not compatible. And that may be one of the reasons why you have heightened chances of infectious disease when your gut is not hosting the normal populations of bacteria that you need.
Also something about autism and the microbiome. Have you done anything researching like?
Yeah, I haven't. I know fellow researchers who do this research. So this is a very fascinating and controversial topic, right? What is known is that in autism, this condition is usually associated with gastrointestinal problems and alterations in the microbiome. So these things go together. I think there is no question about it. I think the big unknown there is whether these changes in the gut, including the types of microbes that reside in the gut, do have any role in the development of this condition, right? So it could be that because gut health and immune signaling is so important for the development of the body, including the brain, that there could be some effect. But as I said, because the communication between the gut and the brain is bidirectional, it could be that these changes in the gut, including the microbiome, are a byproduct of a change that primarily occurs in the brain, and that, let us say, is associated with the special type of cognition and behavior of in autism, but at the same time may alter the function of the autonomic system, and in this way alter the state of the function of the gut and the types of microbes that live there. So, in my opinion, is not, although the connection between the two is clear, it's an empirical issue, I don't think it's currently possible to have a definite answer about which way the influence is happening, right? In which direction, maybe even both, but it could also be, as I said, that the brain develops in a special way, and that also, but that this development, these changes are not restricted to the brain itself, but may change the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic system, in a way that there is an alteration in the type of gut function and microbiome composition in autism. So my opinion is that we don't know yet if it is the gut or the microbiomes that cause this alteration. it could be the other way around. Yeah.
One other question: when you stop consuming the probiotica, do you know what?
Yeah, this is a very good question, because this is also something that is not well understood. Because as we learn about microbes, we see that not only their presence is important in the gut and the types of microbe there, but there has to be a physiological state of the gut that enables these bacteria to survive and proliferate. So you may take probiotics and it may not make much of an impact if gut physiology is altered, right? So for example, as I was explaining, the secretions from certain glands in the gut are apparently very important for maintaining the levels of lactobacilli, for example, in the gut. So if these secretions are altered, if the pH of the gut is altered, if the composition of the mucins is not normal, if you have a problem in the nervous system that alters the type of secretions in the gut, these bacteria may be consumed, stay there for a certain amount of time, and then disappear. So it is important to understand that the microbes are there as part of a physiological system where many variables interact, and you may have acute effects by administering microbes, but these may not last if the rest of the gut, the remaining parts of the physiology of the gut, including the epithelial barrier, the mucosal layer, are in an altered state. Yeah.
So is there evidence that techniques to decrease stress, like maybe meditation or autogenic training, lead to higher secretion of mucus?
Yeah, this is also a very good question. I don't think there is direct evidence, but indirectly, these techniques, they seem to engage the parasympathetic system, including the vagus nerve. So techniques for respiration, meditation, and related techniques that are all in some way associated with a calmer state, a state of lack of perceived threats, right, can enhance the function of the parasympathetic system. And because we know the parasympathetic system is the major driver for the gut to perform its function, which is to digest and absorb nutrients and protect the organism against potential pathogens that enter into the gut, then I would expect that these techniques, they can to some extent promote these protective functions, including mucus release, by enhancing the function of the vagus nerve. There is no proof for that that I know. I did not prove it myself, not yet at least. But I think, like, if we put the pieces together, they make logical sense. Yeah.
One question: we have heard that if you take antibiotics.
Yeah, this is also a very interesting and complicated question, right? One is certainly antibiotics, although they are not necessarily targeting the bacteria in the gut, they do impact and they eliminate many. One possibility is that this is not a complete erasing of the bacteria. So once you stop treatment, the populations that remained may be able to proliferate again, right? Or probably in combination, as you interrupt treatment and you resume your normal activities, your normal eating style, you can repopulate the gut with the bacteria that use it to be there. So this is, in experimental models, you can basically eliminate every bacteria with a cocktail of antibiotics, and you make the animals almost depleted of a gut microbiome. But this is kind of a special formula that requires the combination of more than one type of antibiotic. And I think in regular cases, although there is an impact, I am not completely clear that the microbiome as a whole is going to be wiped out from the gastrointestinal tract. So eventually they may be able to reproliferate and recolonize the gut after the interruption of the treatment.
I thought that in the first 3 years, when a baby is growing up, there will be stored anywhere a plan how to rebuild.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, one possibility is that I mean, we know that our initial microbiome, the colonization of the gut initially, is provided by the mother, or at least mostly by the mother, through lactation, and also some researchers believe that the type of delivery, if it's a regular delivery or a C-section, the amount of bacteria the babies are exposed to initially is going to be different. But in the case of lactation, I think there is good evidence that the initial colonization of the gut with probiotics is associated with lactation in the first few days of life, especially the consumption of colostrum, right? So, and it could be that once this initial colonization takes place, there may be always a mechanism may build that that provides, let us say, a cluster or a colony that can also always proliferate throughout life. Yeah. So, but this is another topic that we don't quite understand, because probably just the passive ingestion of the mother's microbiome is not enough. Probably there are a number of physiological processes occurring in the baby's gut that facilitates and enhances the colonization and the proliferation of good bacteria. And interestingly, the glands I was mentioning that seem to be important for the microbiome levels, they only exist in lactating mammals. So only animals that lactate have these glands. So they probably are very important for establishing the first colonies of microbes in the gut during lactation, and that's why they are not needed in animals that do not lactate. But that's another speculation that we don't know yet whether it's the case, but yeah.
Last question, what is your view into the future, or what are you doing next?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, my interest is to understand better how the gut diseases, especially inflammatory bowel disease and gut damage caused by stress, like ulcerations in general, are formed. What are the mechanisms that link the brain to these conditions, and trying to understand if there is a relatively non-invasive way to attenuate these processes. That's, I think, my more immediate interest, where all this connection between the brain and the gut comes from, and why the gut is so heavily targeted by psychological issues, right? Why it's almost universally affected whenever there is an alteration in brain function. So that's my my objective, let us say, for the near future. Yeah.
How did you do the research?
Yeah, I mean, it depends a little bit on the question, right? So there are many ways in which you can answer such a question. I think one important mechanism is to be able to manipulate neurons in an experimental way. So there are techniques in neuroscience that allows you to turn on and off neurons in a way that is controlled in the experiment. And a few years ago, we were able to do this with the vagus nerve, right? So that was very important for us, because then we can specifically understand what is the effect in an organism of having the vagus nerve more or less active. So this is one way. Another way is we have been trying to develop techniques to observe the behavior of gut cells in vivo, right? So without having to remove the gut and look at it, but if we can observe how the cells operate and in a physiological situation. So we gained a lot of insights about what kind of stimuli causes certain cells in the gut to respond and to be more active, and how certain diseases change their activity, right? So we have, over the last several decades, been able to observe the brain with very high detail. There are many techniques, but to observe the neurons outside the brain is much more difficult for a number of technical reasons. And I think a big frontier to understand the health as an integrative factor is to be able to observe and manipulate neurons outside the brain. And that's technically, it's one of the things that we try to develop. New tools to observe and manipulate neurons, not in the brain but in the body, and understand why they are there and whether or to which extent they are important for immunity and health. Yeah. So yeah, there are a number of new techniques that we that emerged from molecular biology, that entered the neuroscience field, that we have been trying to reorganize and adapt to the body, not necessarily to the brain. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.